Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is having a blessed day. Wow, what a live stream we had last night. 3.5 hours of experiences being shared, talking about everything under the sun. What a great time. And I am so grateful to be able to spend it with you guys who came last night. So thank you. Right now, today's bonus is really, really awesome. What happens when a Bigfoot hunter goes and gets more than he bargains for in Northern California. And how about a cover up? A young girl runs into a Dogman and the police and paramedics have to get involved. Before we get into all that though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. The merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost you a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon. And folks, please, leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's bonus, shall we? Today's first terrifying encounter. I grew up in a small town in western Massachusetts. It was a sleepy little community and not much happened in the way of excitement. But on this weekend we were camping. It was a Memorial Day weekend. I'd just turned 11. We got to the campground and got set up. We mainly were by ourselves and only saw a few other families along the trail on the way to our campsite. It was peaceful, and after a long day of setting up and getting situated, I was ready to crash out in my tent. Help me! Help me! Run! Oh my God, help me! I woke up like an alarm had gone off. I could hear this woman screaming at the top of her lungs. She came running into our campsite and was utterly hysterical with fear. My parents approached her to ask if she was hurt and offered her help, but she pushed past them and kept running, all the while screaming and sobbing. We followed her to the ranger station, as did a few other people from nearby campsites. She woke up the entire campground with her screaming. I remember the police showed up and all the flashing blue and red lights. 2 officers were standing around her as the paramedics wrapped her into a blanket. She kept saying the same thing over and over again. It was a werewolf, I saw it. It was a werewolf, oh my God, oh my God. I remember the paramedics loading her up into the ambulance and driving away. A few more cop cars showed up and the police began searching through the woods. My dad told me to go back to my tent and go to sleep. I don't know what else happened after that. Sometimes I still talk to my parents about that. We all remember it. It still gives us goosebumps. I don't know what that girl saw in the woods that night. I'm just glad I didn't see it. Today's second encounter. I'm going to share with you my experience. I live in a town called Arcata, which is in Northern California. I used to work at an outdoor store downtown. We sold all kinds of things there, like snowboards, mountain bikes, surfboards, kayaks, backpacks, and shoes, etc. I was actually working in the shoe department the day this guy came in. His name was John. He was looking for a pair of hiking boots. Now, as a salesman, it was my job to ask him all sorts of questions to make sure he got exactly what he needed without spending too much money on something he would never use. But in this case, what he needed was our most expensive pair of boots. They were like $220 or something like that. Anyway, I asked him what he was going to be doing with these Uber boots, and he told me that he was a graduate student at the University of Southern Pennsylvania, and that he was part of a startup Bigfoot research team. Now, Northern California is famous for our Bigfoot sightings. The town of Willow Creek, which is about an hour inland from Arcata, is home to the only Bigfoot museum in America, and probably the world. In fact, that famous video of Bigfoot walking through the woods was filmed out just near Willow Creek. So Bigfoot isn't news to us up there, but I had never met any Bigfoot research teams. It was pretty cool. I thought although John seemed kind of hesitant at first to divulge his true purpose there are those who wish to protect the Bigfoot population, like the Hopa, who are the indigenous people native to the area. Their reservation, or ranchera, is well known to have Sasquatch, and in fact the Sasquatch is a sacred animal to them, and they have a corner of their land cordoned off just for Bigfoot. No one's allowed to go there except for a medicine man or woman, and they are very serious about that rule. There are also plenty of eco-Nazis in the area who are also very serious about their Bigfoot. After John realized that I wasn't serious at all about Bigfoot, but that I seriously believed in the possibility of Bigfoot, he opened up a little more and we talked about what he does and whatnot. Whenever anyone comes in and wants to buy a kayak because they're going to kayak from Vancouver to Mexico or wherever, I'm always like, oh, take me with you. And in this case, I was no different. I know, of course, that no one's going to take a guy that they bought shoes from, but it's still funny to say. Anyway, I told him my father was a field biologist, and if they needed it, I would Sherpa for them. Ha, blah, 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 whatever. He bought the shoes, I thanked him, and shook his hand, and that was that. Or so I thought. Next day, John came back in and asked me if I was serious about Sherpaing for them. I was like, heck yeah, and then I turned to my manager and said, hey, Ryan, I quit. Haha, I was kidding, of course. So their plan was to drive out to the trailhead that night, hike on the next day, which was Friday, hang out all day Saturday, and then hike back to their car Sunday, and drive back Sunday evening. I had Saturday and Sunday off, but I had to find someone to cover my shift for Friday. The reason they needed a Sherpa was because they do this thing called call blasting, where they take this super powerful tape deck and a loudspeaker, and they blast Bigfoot sounds into the woods and wait for one to respond. It's an old hunter's trick, but the tape deck was big as a backpack and the loudspeaker was big and heavy as well. So I had to carry all of my stuff, including a sleeping bag, sleeping pad, a change of clothes, toiletry, and all my food. And I had to carry all the tape deck guy's stuff as well. But not only that, I also had to carry half of the loudspeaker guy's stuff as well, because he could only carry a day pack along with his loudspeaker. Oh, and I had to carry a 3-person tent on top of all of that. Luckily, someone else carried the water filter and camp stove and whatnot. But I was still pretty loaded down, to say the least. The hike in was exhausting because it was uphill in the Trinities, which, if you've ever been there, you know, is just way too vertical. Now, John's thesis was on Bigfoot diet. He studied what Bigfoot ate. How do you know what they eat if you've never seen one, you may ask? Well, apparently he studied their scat. Yeah, scat, Bigfoot poop. Which, to me, looked an awful like regular bear poop. But, what do I know, right? I mean, I just sell shoes. Anyway, we kept on stopping every 5 minutes to study Bigfoot tracks and take samples of Bigfoot scat, and that took all friggin' day. So when we got to camp, I was exhausted. We set up camp, and oh yeah, I was also the cook as well, so I made dinner, and then a few of the guys went out to do some call blasting, but the rest of us went to bed. I didn't sleep in the tent because it was so beautiful and warm, I was pretty stoked to be out there with these guys, and I was wondering if I was going to see a Bigfoot. That night, as I lie out there in the middle of the nowhere land, out in the open, I thought of all the Sasquatch stories I had heard. A friend of mine, Mike, had told me about one when he was working as wilderness patrol out there in the Trinities. He had set up camp like I did out in the open under the stars, and he was just about to get to sleep when he heard something. He was really silent and listened, and then realized that it was just a deer or something, not a bear as he had feared. But then he heard it freeze, which was a little unnerving because Mike had already felt like something had been watching him for a while. He just lied there and listened, and the deer stayed absolutely still for a long time. Then suddenly it tore off straight down a very steep hillside and straight at Mike. Mike had actually laid his sleeping bag pad out next to the lake, and the deer, who must have already been aware of Mike, chose to run in his direction rather than hang around for whatever it was that was going to eat it. It ran straight down that hill, straight towards Mike. Then when it got to him, it jumped over him and into the lake, then swam straight across to the exact opposite bank, then got out and kept running straight in the same direction through the woods and off into the hills. Now you can imagine how terrified Mike was at that point. He said he felt like a kid, too afraid to move. He literally hid his head under his sleeping bag. Rock came flying down the hill in his direction and missed him. Then a bigger rock came crashing down. Then a boulder, too enormous for any man to move, came flying past him. And it was at this point he realized that these rocks were being thrown at him. That's when he heard the howl. He said it was completely unlike anything he had ever heard. Now he knows what bears sound like. He knows what mountain lions sound like. He knows what wolves and dogs and foxes sound like. But this was something altogether different. Mike was petrified. A few more rocks were thrown at him, but he realized that whatever it was that was throwing the rocks and howling seemed to be missing him on purpose. It didn't want to kill him, it just wanted him gone. Eventually it stopped and Mike stayed perfectly still. Until first light, at which point he got up, broke camp, and got the heck out of there. When he got home, he looked up Bigfoot research websites, documented his experience. Then he read up on other experiences and found out that rock throwing is actually fairly common. He said they also had recordings on the websites of Bigfoot howls. He said when he listened to them, the first one was obviously a mountain lion. The second one was hound dogs howling in the distance, and these people just didn't know what they sounded like. But then he clicked on a third one, and it was exactly what he had heard. The hair on his arms stood up, and the hair on the back of his neck as well. And he just had to get up and leave his room immediately. A few hours later, he tried again with the same result. His hair stood up, and he had to leave the room. To this day, he can't listen to that recording. After Mike told me that story, I had to get on the website myself and check out the recordings. He was not kidding, it was eerie. Anyway, it was stories like these that filled my head as I lied there in the middle of nowhere land out in the open. The next morning I woke up and made breakfast, and I was told that 4 of them were going to go out and look for more tracks and scat, and that I was to stay behind with this guy named Alistair, who had drank too much the night before while out call blasting and was still sleeping. Someone had to stay behind and make sure that our camp was not raided by raccoons or bears or Bigfoot or eco-Nazis or whatever. So that guy was me. I was beginning to regret this trip. They were all gone all day, and Alistair slept the whole time, so it was just me, bored and paranoid. I kept getting freaked out, and every time I heard a noise, I just knew it was Bigfoot. My thoughts kept going to the negative place. When it was nearing 5 o'clock, I thought they had been killed by a Bigfoot or eco-Nazis or bears. and they'd never return. Eventually they did, and it was just in time for dinner. Coincidentally, Alistair was also just in time for dinner. John said that they had no luck finding tracks or scats, but that a trail led to the Hopa Ranchera, and so they could go no further. However, when it got dark, they were going to go and follow the tracks onto Hopa land and do some call blasting. Great. I thought, now I'm going to be the one left behind in the dark. But to my surprise, they told me since Alistair had slept all day, he was the one that had to stay behind and watch camp, and I was going to get to go with them. Cool, now things are starting to look up. So we finished dinner, left Alistair in charge of cleaning up, and we got our things together for night patrol. I was pretty nervous about trekking onto Hopa land without permission. I also felt a little guilty about it as well, but anyway, I just talked myself out of it. And I was so excited about seeing a Bigfoot. All I had to do was carry my own little day pack. The tape deck and loudspeaker weren't to be handled by anyone other than SPU staff and students. This is getting even better. We set out and we find some tracks that they had found earlier. I should say that these weren't the kind of Bigfoot tracks that I had expected when I first signed up with these guys. They weren't footprints. There would be broken twigs or a smushed leaf into a tiny little hair on a tree, but these guys had a real eye for it, and they would point things out to me. We had to remain completely silent. That I would sometimes see and other times I could completely miss. Take the smushed leaves, for example. When they were pointing them out to me, all I could see was a leaf on a rock. It wasn't until later they explained to me that something had stepped on it, flattening it out and turning it a little lighter shade of green. It occurred to me that these guys were professional trackers. John, Alistair, and the professor were all big game hunters. One of the other guys was ex-Special Forces and had done tours in Afghanistan. The last guy was a super avid outdoorsman who had done backpacking trips all over the world. They were all right at home in the woods as I was, but they had a lot more experience with tracking than I did because of their job. This is what they do. Before long it was dark and we were crossing over into Hopa land. The moon was almost full, so we went along by its light as best as we could. But eventually we lost the trail of the Sasquatch, so that's where we started call blasting. The professor wore the tape deck on his chest, and the avid outdoorsman carried the loudspeaker. That was the first time I had heard their recording, and it sent chills up my spine. It was like the recording on the website I had heard. It was the same howl that Mike had heard out in these very same hills all those years ago. It was spooky, and that loudspeaker was really, really loud. We blasted calls in all directions, then moved a little further in the direction that we believed the tracks had led, then did some more call blasting. We did that for a couple of hours, and it was getting close to midnight, and we were getting tired. The guys weren't ready to call it quits when the howl, it started soft and low and grew into a loud, high-pitched, full-bodied shriek. It was way off in the distance, but that sound carried. We were stunned. The hairs on my arm stood up. The hair on my back of my neck stood up as well. My heart, after not beating for what seemed like forever, started beating in my chest like a double-kick drum in a Cannibal Corpse song. Boom, 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 boom. I was sure that everyone else could have heard my heart from where they stood if their hearts hadn't been doing the same thing. We probably sounded like an off-tempo marching band. No one moved. The howl died off and was replaced by silence. Still, no one moved. Finally, the professor blasted a howl in return. Everyone just about shot themselves when he did that. We were so fixated on the silence that none of us were expecting that call blast. I think I may have let out this audible yelp. My heart almost gave out entirely. I don't care how tough you think you are. when you are out in the wild and you hear that howl, you feel as frightened as a helpless child. We waited in silence again, then the howl. We waited, not knowing what to do. All of us were looking around at each other and wondering if anyone was going to do something. Finally, the professor started forward toward the direction of the beast that we followed. We would stop and blast call every once in a while, and every once in a while the call would return. Soon, the fear turned into excitement. But after a while, we all started to notice that as we are moving toward the howl is also moving toward us. This went on for about a half an hour, moving, call blasting, moving, howling, moving, and we started to get really close to it. It seemed to be converging onto a saddle in the landscape. It was a sort of a triple-crowned saddle that left a huge wooded flat area in the middle. We knew that if it smelled us, it may shy away, so we moved downwind. Thankfully, downwind also happened to be slightly uphill, so that was nice because we definitely didn't want to be downhill of this thing. But as we were trying to get uphill downwind of it, it was simultaneously moving uphill downwind of us. So we were actually moving closer to each other at an ever-increasing acute angle. In the middle of the flat area in the saddle was a large outcropping, and on the other side of the outcropping was a clearing. It became clear that if we both continued on our respective course, we would reach opposite sides of the outcropping, and that's exactly how it happened. When we reached the outcropping, we let out a call blast, then moved around toward the clearing. By this point, the excitement had turned back into fear, and our movement had become painfully slow. My psychological health was truly taking a beating. About halfway to the clearing, our call was answered, and we froze. It was just on the other side of the outcropping from us. I have never been so scared in all my life. At this point, I was going, where is my gun? Why didn't I bring a gun? What was I thinking? I didn't even actually own a gun at the time, but at that moment I truly wished I had. It didn't matter that I had a big knife. It didn't matter that I was with 4 big mean dudes who also had knives. It just didn't matter. I might as well have been alone and naked. Why hadn't I brought a gun? We stayed frozen for about 5 minutes, then started to move around toward the clearing again. Those last few steps were the hardest steps I'd ever taken. I had to fight my screaming instinct to run for my life with every step. As we rounded the outcropping and came into the clearing, we stopped dead in our tracks for the final time. Because there, in the clearing right in front of us, not 10 feet away, was Austria's premier Bigfoot research team with a tape deck and a loudspeaker. I truly love that story. Not only does it fill you with fear and panic as an encounter, but it also teaches you something. It teaches you not to assume things, and even if you are a self-proclaimed expert, notice I said self-proclaimed because in cryptozoology, my belief is there is no expert. I don't care how many websites you started or how many times you've been in the woods with camouflage on. There is no expert because, well, we don't have one in front of us. Dogman, Bigfoot, whatever. We have none of them in front of us. There's a reason for that, because no one's an expert. Otherwise, we'd know how to successfully track them, capture them, and zoo them up. But anyway, I love that, and I wanted to share that with you one last time before I put that encounter away for good. I've shared it once on this channel, but it just really kind of keeps it real. But you're wondering, is that place really bad for cryptids? Well, yeah, it is, because here's a couple of encounters and sightings in the Trinity County and the Hopa Reservation. 1966, Larry Browning sees a Sasquatch near his campsite north of Weaverville in the Trinity Alps. April 6, 68, after 2 more visits to the same campsite with no luck, seeing another Bigfoot, Larry Browning sees Bigfoot wading the South Fork of the Salmon River. The next day, a female Sasquatch follows him for a half an hour on a hike, then charges him. April 8th, 68. At the same campground, Mike Melton sees a Bigfoot leaning over the river to get a drink of water. April 2nd, 1966, Nick Campbell sees a Sasquatch searching through trash cans at a campsite north of Weaverville in the Trinity Alps. The next day, he sees a Sasquatch again 3 miles west of the camp and spends a half an hour playing hide-and-seek with it. Several other campers see the same Sasquatch. It raids the trash cans 2 more nights and is seen 1 more time. July 1969, Don Ballard and a companion riding horseback see a Bigfoot in the Trinity Alps near Trinity Center. Back in 58, while driving on Highway 299 east of Weaverville, 2 doctors see a Sasquatch cross the highway at night. 7th, 1960, a Bob Titmus finds 2 sets of Sasquatch tracks walking along Road 9 miles south of Witchpeck near Hopa, tracking towards Willow Creek. Hopa and Bluff Creek, 1958. A woman and her daughter see a large and small Sasquatch on a hillside above Hopa Valley, just northwest of Willow Creek. 1962. Ennis Schofield describes how his fencing was torn down, fence post by fence post, the week after it was erected nearby the Bluff Creek Resort. Each post was pulled up out of its concrete pitting in the ground, which Schofield said required unheard of strength and was probably done because it blocked the pathway the Sasquatch people used to reach the creek every night. Pointing toward the hillside, he told Betty Allen, "They come down that hill there. You can see their tracks, and then they go down to the creek to drink, and then maybe go up to it, because no tracks come back up the hill. They go somewhere else," he said. Schofield told a reporter that he didn't feel safe barbecuing outdoors anymore, and were contemplating selling their cabin to Sanders Boy, owners of the resort on the main road. August 3rd, 1963, a man and his boy see a Sasquatch leap over a 5-foot fence and run into the woods near Hopa. August 14th, 1960, Bob Tittis sees the same 2 sets of Bigfoot tracks he saw a week before, C64 on Mill Creek Ridge Road, 8 miles northeast of Hopa. Willow Creek, California, 1967. Russell Somerville sees a 9-foot Sasquatch walk 50 feet along Highway 299, 1 mile west of Willow Creek, and then go into the woods. Mike Forden, while sleeping in his Dodge van at Gray Falls Campground, wakes up at about midnight because the Sasquatch was kicking his tires and rocking his van violently. Mike sees the Sasquatch's hairy chest, chin, and hand through the van's window. The 8-foot Bigfoot continues to harass the van for 2 hours until Mike blows his horn. 1934. Dave Zebo follows a set of Sasquatch tracks up Weaver Bali Mountain. 1936. Dave Zebo sees Bigfoot tracks on Mount Bali heading over the mountain. Now these last 2 are pretty interesting because, well, Fort Bragg has had a lot of different Dogman sightings, Bigfoot sightings. Fort Bragg, California, 1962. Robert Hetfield gets up to investigate barking dogs at his house in Fort Bragg and sees the head and shoulders of a creature about 6 foot above his 6-foot fence. He returns to the house to tell Bud Jensen, But when they return, it's gone. Bud goes back with his gun while Robert rounds the corner of the porch and walks right into the creature. He was knocked to the ground and scrambled to the house on his hands and knees. Bud sees the middle of the Bigfoot go by the window and tries to close the door, but the Sasquatch holds it open, shotgun in hand. Bud says, "Let it in, and I'll get it." But the Bigfoot lets go of the door and walks away. A muddy handprint on the door is 11.5 inches long, although the fingers were quite stubby. 1977. J.S. reported hearing dogs chasing a bipedal creature through the woods along Little Lake Road, and the discovery of other animals found disemboweled. Today's third encounter. I was walking my dog and I saw something about the size of a person, I'd say 110 feet away. But as I got closer, I saw it slinking behind a brush, and I saw its hind end. In my mind, I was like, cool, it's a lion. Then I'm like, wait a minute, I'm in New York, in the suburbs. But its feet extended almost like a kangaroo, like thick, bulky ankles, but almost like a human. It was gray, hairless. It was on 2 feet at one point that I originally thought it was a person, but as I approached it, it was on 4 legs. The way the back end looked and moved, it also seemed to have some sort of tail. No, it wasn't a dog. It moved more like a big cat, if anything, and also, no, I'm not on any drugs. Also, I don't suffer from hallucinations. Today's fourth encounter. This happened to me last August when I was driving down from Washington to San Diego with some friends. The 3 of us were camping in cool spots along the way, and at one point during our trip, we stopped to camp for a night near the Sierra Nevada mountains. My friend had heard that the sunrise reflection over the mountains was beautiful, so we decided to wake up at around 5 the next morning and watch. The time came and we reluctantly left our tent and walked about 10 minutes from our pretty remote campsite over to a long road and stretch of desert with a great view of the mountains. We stood there for about 20 minutes. Then, as I was looking across the distance, something caught my eye. It seemed to be some type of animal, but a weird size and super white. At first, I thought it was a bunny, but then decided there was no way. It was far too large for a bunny. The figure was maybe the size of a large dog, white, and moved kind of unnaturally, like jerky and fast. I remember the face being really weird, kind of undescribable. It gave me goosebumps as I stared at it, trying to figure out what I was seeing. I looked over to my friends and asked them if they had ever seen that thing, and I described it. When I looked back, I couldn't see it anymore. Neither of my friends had seen this creature, but they shared a look, and one of them did motion 2 fingers walking on his arms. The other nodded, and they told me they didn't know what it was, and we should go back to our campsite. Today's final encounter. Let me say first and foremost, I'm a man of logic and explanation. I never believed in ghosts or any cryptid beings really in my life, but something happened the other night that really made me feel weird. So I live somewhere in between country and town here in Florida and see an abundance of wildlife. Fox, coyotes, raccoons are all very normal for me to see. Since there is a large population of fox around here and most people have chickens, everyone has large dogs, including myself. I have a 70-pound boy and a 60-pound girl pit. They are fearless. They know this is their property and they will protect it as such, alerting me if they hear anything. And if they do, I open the door and they run out and chase off whatever it is. The other night I woke up randomly and it was disturbingly quiet outside. Not a single cricket, and my dogs were not on my bed like usual. All of a sudden, a howl like I had never heard before It went off like a siren and sent a chill down my spine, like a deep yell almost, but definitely from an animal. I turned the lights on in my house to see my pit bulls at the back of their dog crate shaking. I've never seen them look like that or the look on their faces before. Purely terrified, so I turned the lights off, grabbed a flashlight, and looked out my back window. What I saw about 200 yards off by the tree line near the back of my property was this dog thing. I vaguely saw it, but it was very similar to a hyena built, with a large amount of fur on its neck, like a mane, almost, and skinny back legs. Its head looked very wolf-like, with erect ears and a large skull. It was huge. It was so black it was hard to make out distinct characteristics, but its presence scared basically any living thing around that seemed that night. The next morning I went to the spot I saw this creature, but saw no tracks or hair or anything. But I know what I saw, and never saw anything like it before. Has anyone in Florida seen anything like this? We've been having a lot of dead dogs in the area. Dogs that are large and are being killed by something. Other people think it's coyotes or feral dog, but I think it's the thing that I saw. Just seeing my dog so terrified really scared me.
All right, folks. A lot of great information right there. Some very horrific experiences. Wow. I hope you enjoyed them as much as I enjoyed sharing them with you. Guys, thanks for supporting the channel. Your support is what makes this channel special and what continues for it to grow and go. Please, everyone, stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, our pets, our family, and friends. These creatures are real. They're out there. They're dangerous. Share this information with the people you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, and never stop looking for answers.